Los Angeles has always been one of the toughest housing markets in America. For decades, the city has represented opportunity and status. If you could own a home in LA, you had made it. But in 2025, the story looks very different. Instead of bidding wars and sky-high appraisals, many sellers are quietly slashing their asking prices just to get someone through the door. A few years ago, houses in neighborhoods like Echo Park, Silver Lake, or Sherman Oaks would sell within days of hitting the market. But some sit unsold for months, collecting dust, with realtors urging owners to be realistic and cut prices dramatically. The numbers are sobering. In parts of LA County, median home prices are sliding downward after years of relentless growth. Combine that with mortgage rates climbing over 7% and property insurance premiums skyrocketing after multiple years of climate disasters, and you've got a recipe for paralysis in the market. Even luxury homes, once seen as bulletproof, are getting hit. Agents report million-dollar condos in downtown LA and Beverly Hills going unsold despite reductions in the hundreds of thousands. And here's the kicker. This isn't just a little wobble, it feels like a genuine correction. The California Association of Realtors recently warned that statewide sales are down by double digits compared to just 2 years ago. Sellers are panicking, pulling listings, or trying desperate incentives like covering closing costs or buying down interest rates for buyers. The illusion of California real estate always goes up is cracking. For ordinary people, this is terrifying. Families who stretched themselves thin to buy in 2020 or 2021 now feel trapped, watching their home values shrink. New buyers, especially younger millennials and Gen Z, are locked out entirely by high borrowing costs, even as prices decline. It's a paradox. Homes are cheaper on paper, but less affordable than ever. And when things look this shaky, the spotlight inevitably shifts to leadership. That's where Governor Gavin Newsom comes in, and critics say his reaction has been anything but steady. California's Governor, Gavin Newsom, has always positioned himself as the man with the master plan. He once boldly declared that under his leadership, California would build 3.5 million homes by 2025, an eye-popping promise that sounded like salvation in a state starved of housing. Fast forward to today, and that number looks less like a plan and more like a punchline. Even his own allies admit it's nowhere near reality. Instead, the state is falling further behind, with new construction approvals declining instead of surging. And now the cracks are showing. Every time a new report comes out about prices falling in Los Angeles, foreclosures creeping up, or residents leaving the state in droves, the cameras turn to Newsom. He can't hide behind rosy language anymore. His recent push to fast-track construction by stripping away environmental reviews, something Californians once held sacred, feels less like careful reform and more like a governor in panic mode. Yes, laws like AB 130 now allow many housing projects to bypass red tape. Yes, he's throwing political weight behind urban density near transit lines. But when the public sees collapsing prices, burning neighborhoods, and insurance bills going through the roof, those policies don't sound visionary, they sound desperate. What's worse is the backlash. Local governments across the state, from suburban city councils to small towns, are openly resisting these top-down orders. They argue that Sacramento is bulldozing community voices and pushing projects onto areas without the infrastructure to handle them. Environmentalists accuse Newsom of trading long-term sustainability for short-term headlines. Even moderate voters are asking the blunt question: if you couldn't deliver before, why should we believe you now? The political theater is undeniable. Clips of Newsom dodging questions or raising his voice in frustration have gone viral, cementing the impression of a leader under siege. To some Californians, it looks like he's not steering the ship but scrambling to plug the leaks as water pours in. And in a state where housing is the single most visible crisis, touching renters, owners, and the homeless alike, that perception could haunt him for years. But even as Newsom battles political flames, California faces literal ones. The market isn't just crashing on its own, it's being pushed off a cliff by disasters that destroy homes and push thousands into chaos. And that brings us to the wildfire fallout. It's one thing for a housing market to wobble because of interest rates or high prices. It's another thing entirely when whole neighborhoods are literally wiped off the map. In January 2025, Southern California was rocked by wildfires so destructive they didn't just scar the land, they tore through the heart of the housing supply. More than 18,000 structures were damaged or destroyed, and over 200,000 people were forced to evacuate. Families fled in the middle of the night with little more than the clothes on their backs, and entire streets that once represented stability were reduced to ash. For Los Angeles, this wasn't just another fire season, it was a full-blown housing earthquake. The fires didn't discriminate. Modest apartments, million-dollar hillside homes, and suburban neighborhoods all went up in flames. That sudden wipeout of supply made an already tight market even tighter, and the ripple effects have been brutal. Renters pushed out of burned units flooded the market for temporary housing, driving up prices even as average Angelenos could least afford it. Meanwhile, displaced homeowners scrambled to find somewhere to live while battling with insurance companies that were either dragging their feet or flat out refusing to renew coverage. And here's where it gets ugly. Reports quickly surfaced of landlords trying to take advantage of the disaster. In the immediate aftermath, Los Angeles officials warned about price gouging, where rents were suddenly jacked up beyond what was legally allowed under emergency orders. Imagine losing your home one day and then being asked to pay double just to keep a roof over your family's head the next. That's the reality many Californians faced. Beyond the financial toll, there's the emotional wreckage. Imagine being a kid who grew up in a neighborhood only to come back and see nothing but charred remains. Or being a retiree who thought they'd finally paid off their home, only to see it vanish in smoke overnight. These fires don't just burn houses, they burn lives, dreams, and the fragile sense of security people cling to. And the cruel irony? As more homes vanish to fire, insurance companies retreat further, hiking rates or pulling out entirely from high-risk zones. That leaves homeowners stranded, unable to insure their properties, which in turn drags down values across entire neighborhoods. The wildfire crisis isn't just a side story, it's now one of the main villains in California's housing collapse. And while nature is tearing homes apart, the human cost of this crisis is multiplying. Because beyond wildfires, the everyday struggle of renters and owners paints an even grimmer picture of who's winning and who's losing in Los Angeles. When people talk about the California housing crisis, it's easy to get lost in the numbers. Median prices, interest rates, permits issued, supply and demand charts. But behind every statistic is a family, a tenant, a worker just trying to hang on. And right now, those people are breaking under the weight of it all. Let's start with renters. In Los Angeles County, more than 57% of households spend over 30% of their income on rent, which already qualifies as cost-burdened. For many, it's far worse. They're spending half their paycheck just to keep a roof overhead. After the wildfires and the tightening market, rents spiked even higher in some neighborhoods, leaving people with an impossible choice: pay the landlord or feed the kids. And while California has rent control laws in some areas, loopholes and emergency demand allow landlords to push limits. Families that once dreamed of saving up for a home are now struggling to even keep their apartment keys. Then there are the homeowners, the ones who bought during the 2020 to 2021 boom. Many stretched themselves to the edge with adjustable-rate mortgages or maxed-out budgets. Now, with property values sliding and refinancing out of reach due to high rates, they're trapped. Some are underwater already, owing more on their mortgage than the house is worth. Others fear that one job loss or one medical bill will tip them into foreclosure. What was supposed to be the American dream is turning into a nightmare. But perhaps the most telling sign of how bad things have gotten is the number of people who are simply leaving. A recent poll showed nearly 1 in 4 residents of LA County is considering relocation after the fires and relentless cost of living. Families are heading to Texas, Nevada, and Arizona, where homes are cheaper, insurance is more affordable, and they feel like they might finally breathe again. The exodus isn't just anecdotal, it's reshaping the population map. U-Haul and moving companies can't keep up with demand for one-way trips out of the Golden State. And what does that leave behind? A city that feels hollowed out. Neighborhoods where longtime residents vanish, replaced by empty houses or short-term rentals. Schools losing students. businesses losing customers, community ties unraveling. Los Angeles has always been a city of reinvention, but right now it feels like it's bleeding its own lifeblood. And as people leave, as homes sit vacant, and as despair spreads, the debate over how to fix this is heating up. Newsom is pushing reforms, but local governments, environmental groups, and communities are all clashing over what those reforms mean. That battle sets the stage for the next big question. Can California build its way out, or is it too late? If you listen to Governor Newsom, the answer to California's crisis is simple: build more, faster, everywhere. And on paper, that makes sense. After all, the state is short by millions of homes, and the math says more supply equals lower costs. But in practice, it's become one of the most bitter political fights in the state. Newsom has pushed sweeping reforms aimed at unblocking housing production. Laws like AB 130 strip away long-standing environmental reviews, (SECA), allowing infill projects to skip years of paperwork. Other bills fast-track dense housing near transit lines, with the idea that California should grow up, not out. The vision is bold: more apartments, more affordable units, more homes where people already live and work. But here's the catch: what looks like progress from Sacramento often feels like a bulldozer rolling over local communities. City councils and neighborhood associations are revolting. In Los Angeles and across the state, locals argue they're being forced to absorb massive changes with no say. Sacramento doesn't care about us, one city council member recently told reporters after state officials overruled a zoning decision. For these communities, it isn't just about building homes. It's about infrastructure that can't keep up, water shortages, schools already at capacity, and streets jammed with traffic. To them, Newsom isn't solving the crisis. He's exporting chaos into their neighborhoods. Environmentalists are also split. Some back the reforms, arguing that denser, urban housing will reduce sprawl and cut emissions in the long run. But others warn that slashing environmental review sets a dangerous precedent. They fear projects could move ahead without adequate safeguards, risking harm to ecosystems and vulnerable communities. It's a rare case where green California is fighting itself, climate urgency versus climate protection. And then there are the voters caught in the middle. Some desperately want new housing, hoping that supply will finally bring prices down. Others cling to the character of their neighborhoods, terrified of towers rising over single-family homes. The debate is fierce, emotional, and deeply personal, because everyone knows the stakes. If California gets this wrong, the result could be billions wasted, communities fractured, and no relief for the very people who need housing most. In the meantime, progress is slow. Projects are proposed, lawsuits fly, city councils resist, and the clock ticks. Every month of delay means more families squeezed out, more renters priced into poverty, and more headlines about a state that promised to fix its crisis but can't seem to get out of its own way. And while politicians fight in offices and courtrooms, the reality on the streets tells its own story. California's homelessness crisis remains one of the most visible and heartbreaking consequences of this broken housing system. You can't drive through Los Angeles without seeing it. Rows of tents lining sidewalks, encampments under freeway overpasses, makeshift shelters popping up in empty lots. It's a crisis hiding in plain sight. California already has the largest homeless population in America, and LA is ground zero. And while politicians spar over reforms and housing permits, the people left out of the market entirely are paying the heaviest price. Numbers only tell part of the story. California's most recent data shows that while homelessness overall dipped slightly in some counties, thanks to temporary state funding and local programs, the raw scale remains staggering. LA alone still counts tens of thousands of people without a permanent home. The so-called unsheltered rate, meaning people living directly on the street or in cars, is among the highest in the country. And those aren't just statistics. They're individuals with names, stories, and tragedies that keep compounding. Take the fires earlier this year. Over 200,000 people were displaced at the peak of evacuations. Some were able to move in with family or use insurance to secure hotels, but others simply joined the ranks of the unhoused. Shelters overflowed, and many evacuees faced the cruel reality of being treated like just another homeless person once the flames died down. Disaster didn't just destroy homes, it swelled the crisis. And then there's the affordability trap. Renters who lose their apartments to rising prices or eviction don't have a cushion. Once you're priced out in LA, there's no cheaper neighborhood waiting down the street. For many, homelessness isn't the result of one bad decision. It's the slow grind of impossible bills, a sudden medical expense, or the loss of a job. One moment you're barely hanging on, the next you're on the curb with everything you own in a backpack. Governor Newsom has poured billions into programs aimed at reducing homelessness. Some local reports claim progress, like a 9.5% drop in unsheltered homelessness in one county, but the overall problem dwarfs the victories. Critics say money is wasted on bureaucracy, shelters that aren't built, or projects that never scale. Supporters argue it's a long fight and that at least some movement is happening. But for the average Angelino, what they see are the tents, the encampments, the human suffering that hasn't gone away. And make no mistake, this crisis bleeds back into the housing market. Neighborhoods with visible encampments often see property values sink, pushing sellers to cut prices even more. Buyers hesitate, investors look elsewhere, and the spiral continues. Housing instability feeding homelessness, and homelessness feeding housing instability. And while homelessness is the most visible crisis on the streets, another force is quietly reshaping California's housing map: the mass exodus of people packing up and leaving the state altogether. California has always carried a certain mythology, the golden state where dreams are built, where the sun shines, and where opportunity waits around every corner. But for more and more people, that dream has curdled into something darker. Instead of chasing the California dream, families, workers, and even businesses are packing up and heading out. The so-called California exodus isn't just a buzzword, it's happening in real time, and Los Angeles is one of the epicenters. Look at the numbers. A recent poll revealed nearly 1 in 4 LA County residents is considering leaving after the devastating wildfires and ongoing cost of living crisis. That isn't a small group, that's hundreds of thousands of people thinking seriously about starting over somewhere else. And the moving trucks don't lie. U-Haul and major relocation companies report a surge in one-way trips out of California, with top destinations like Texas, Nevada, and Arizona pulling in the families who once fought tooth and nail just to rent in LA. Why are people leaving? The reasons are as layered as the crisis itself. For some, it's the cost, rent that eats half their paycheck, groceries that cost more than anywhere else in the country, insurance bills climbing higher every month. For others, it's the quality of life, traffic that turns daily commutes into nightmares, crime that makes neighborhoods feel less safe, and now, the constant threat of wildfires or natural disasters. Add in a collapsing housing market, and it feels like the walls are closing in. The stories are heartbreaking. A young couple in Pasadena who bought at the peak in 2021 find themselves drowning in debt, their home worth less than their mortgage. They sell at a loss, pack their 2 kids into a car, and move to Phoenix, where they can rent a house twice the size for half the cost. A retired teacher in the Valley, pushed out by rising property taxes and declining neighborhood safety, chooses to leave behind lifelong friends and head to Texas to be closer to family. Each departure leaves a hole in the fabric of Los Angeles. And the effect ripples out. Schools lose students and funding. Local businesses lose steady customers. Churches and community groups shrink. A neighborhood that once thrived on long-time residents slowly hollows out, replaced either by short-term renters or no one at all. It creates a ghostly feeling, a city in transition, where more people seem to be leaving than arriving. For decades, California was the place people moved to in search of better lives. Now it's the place they leave behind, chasing stability somewhere else. And every family that drives out of LA with a packed car is another reminder that the state's housing crisis isn't just about dollars and cents, it's about people giving up on a dream they no longer believe in. And while families leave in search of stability, those who stay behind are left to wrestle with a housing market that feels more like a gamble than a guarantee. That's where the speculative side of real estate, investors, flippers, and corporate buyers adds another twist to the collapse. For years, Los Angeles real estate wasn't just about families looking for a place to live, it was a playground for investors. Hedge funds, corporate landlords, flippers, and international buyers poured billions into the city, betting that prices would rise forever. Houses weren't homes, they were chips on a poker table. And for a while, the gamble paid off. Between 2012 and 2021, property values in LA soared, flipping became a fast track to wealth, and corporate investors gobbled up entire blocks of single-family homes, turning them into high-rent rentals. But in 2025, that bet is crashing down. As interest rates climbed and affordability evaporated, the same investors who drove the boom are now fueling the bust. Some are bailing out of the market entirely, selling off properties at steep discounts to cut their losses. Others are sitting on vacant homes, waiting for better conditions, which only worsens the supply crisis for actual families. And the flippers, the ones who poured money into quick renovations hoping to cash in, are getting hammered. Homes sit unsold, carrying costs pile up, and profit margins vanish. The corporate players add another layer of damage. Companies like Blackstone, Invitation Homes, and other private equity groups became notorious during the last decade for buying up huge swaths of property and converting them into rentals. Critics argue they helped push prices artificially higher by outbidding ordinary families. Now, as the market collapses, those same companies are accused of abandoning neighborhoods, leaving half-renovated houses behind, or jacking up rents on struggling tenants to offset their financial losses. What began as a gold rush has turned into a slow bleed. The ripple effect is crushing. When flippers can't sell, it drags down nearby property values. When corporate landlords hike rents, it drives more families into crisis. And when international investors pull back, spooked by California's political and economic instability, it sucks even more money out of the housing ecosystem. The dream of homeownership in LA was already fragile. Now it feels like the game was rigged all along, tilted in favor of big money that never cared about building communities, only extracting profits. Ordinary Angelenos feel the betrayal deeply. For them, it's not just a financial collapse, it's a moral one. The system allowed homes to become commodities, treating shelter as an asset instead of a necessity. And now, as the speculative bubble bursts, it's the people who wanted nothing more than a safe place to live who are paying the steepest price. And while the investors count their losses, another group of Californians is fighting a very different battle, trying to rebuild their lives after losing everything to disasters that seem to hit harder every year. If losing your home to fire, flood, or earthquake wasn't devastating enough, many Californians are discovering that the hardest part isn't the disaster, it's what comes after. In Los Angeles and across the state, families who thought they were protected by homeowners insurance are finding out that the safety net has holes big enough to fall through. The January 2025 wildfires were a brutal example. More than 18,000 structures were damaged or destroyed, and tens of thousands of families turned to insurance providers for help. But instead of fast relief, many got stonewalled. Companies delayed claims for months, demanded endless documentation, or flat-out denied coverage, citing fine print about high-risk zones. Some insurers have pulled out of California entirely, refusing to renew policies in neighborhoods most likely to burn. That leaves homeowners scrambling, forced onto the state's last resort insurance program, called FAIR, which is limited and far more expensive. For families, the result is devastating. Imagine paying into a policy for 20 years, believing you're covered, only to find out your insurer vanished the moment you needed them most. People who lost everything are now paying sky-high premiums just to protect what little they managed to rebuild. Others can't get coverage at all, meaning their home has no safety net if the next fire or quake hits. And when homes are uninsured, their market value tanks. No buyer wants to take on that kind of risk. The rebuilding costs pile on. Construction expenses in California are among the highest in the nation, driven up by labor shortages, supply chain issues, and strict building codes. Families who lost modest single-story houses discover that rebuilding can cost double what insurance pays out. Some abandon the idea altogether, selling the land at a discount to developers or leaving town completely. Neighborhoods scarred by disaster often stay half empty for years, shadows of what they once were. This cycle deepens the collapse. Disasters wipe out homes, insurers retreat, rebuilding stalls, and communities shrink. And each time it happens, the next disaster hits harder, because fewer people are left to fight for recovery. It's a vicious loop that leaves families exhausted and cities hollow. And here's the cruel twist. Even people who weren't directly hit by the fires or floods are affected. Insurance companies spread risk, meaning premiums are rising for everyone in California. A family in LA who never saw a flame near their home might suddenly face a 30 to 40% jump in annual premiums because the system is collapsing statewide. In a city where every dollar already feels stretched, that's the straw breaking a lot of backs. And while disasters and insurers drain Californians dry, there's one more piece to this puzzle that can't be ignored: the economy itself. Jobs, wages, and opportunity are shifting, and they're pulling the housing market down with them. At the heart of California's housing collapse lies a simple, painful truth: wages just don't match the cost of living anymore. In Los Angeles, the median home price, even after recent drops, still hovers around $800,000 to $900,000, depending on the neighborhood. Compare that to the median household income in LA County, which sits around $76,000. Do the math, and it's obvious: homeownership isn't just out of reach, it's practically a fantasy for most working families. This imbalance has been building for years. The booming tech and entertainment industries created pockets of extraordinary wealth, but those salaries aren't the norm. For every software engineer pulling six figures, there are dozens of service workers, teachers, nurses, delivery drivers, and small business employees struggling just to cover rent. Even professionals who once represented the middle class, like firefighters or public school teachers, are finding that the cost of living in LA simply doesn't add up. Some commute hours each day from cheaper suburbs, while others throw in the towel and move out of state entirely. The economic squeeze doesn't stop at wages. Inflation has pushed up the price of everything: gas, groceries, utilities. Insurance premiums and property taxes climb higher each year. And while jobs are plentiful on paper, many don't pay enough to make a dent in the cost of housing. Gig work and contract jobs, which so many Californians rely on, offer little security and no pathway to stable homeownership. People are working harder, longer, and often multiple jobs. Yet the dream of owning a home in Los Angeles slips further away. For younger generations, the outlook feels especially grim. Millennials and Gen Z, already saddled with student loans and debt, are watching their parents' model of success: buy a home, build equity, climb the ladder, disappear before their eyes. Instead, they're faced with a cycle of renting, moving, and instability. The cultural promise of California, that you can come here, work hard, and make it, rings hollow when the math just doesn't work anymore. And this has ripple effects. If workers can't afford to live where they work, businesses suffer. If families can't settle down, schools suffer. If communities keep hollowing out, the very identity of Los Angeles suffers. The economic squeeze isn't just breaking wallets, it's breaking the fabric of the city. The big question is this: what does the future hold? Some experts believe this correction could reset the market, bringing prices closer to reality. Others warn it's only the beginning of a larger collapse, one that will scar the state for decades. Either way, one truth remains: unless California finds a way to align wages with the cost of living, the dream will stay broken and the exodus will continue. And so, as homes sit unsold, families pack up their lives, and politicians argue over solutions, Los Angeles finds itself at a crossroads. Will it reinvent itself and prove resilient once again, or will the California dream finally collapse under the weight of its own promises?